and high on challenge, because children rise to our expectations. Then we talked about example and the fact that children are so susceptible to whatever is put in front of them, or whoever sits beside them, or whoever they watch. And therefore, we talked about how important it is that you not just talk with your kids deeply, but that you have habits or customs of talking frequently, eyeball to eyeball, with each of your kids. And in those conversations, we had a lady who wrote a book years ago in Australia called Leaving Early. It was a tough book, but she said one of the things she discovered in her writing is that affection is not enough. You have to be very clear. So customs of talking with your kids, but also talking about what's right and what's wrong. You're giving them the guidebook. Look at the other influences coming in. Have your eyes open. Make sure that we correct kids calmly, because our emotional example often is the first example that sticks. And if we give the wrong emotional example, it doesn't matter what we've said. The reality is it's the emotion which comes across. That means we've got to fix our faces. And today we're going to explore number 11, which is the 4 domains of good habit. Here we go. Remember, we talked about the end game. Our purpose in building character is in order to teach kids to act freely, throwing themselves into whatever they're doing. And that means that they can make loving decisions, that they're not constrained, because you can't love if you're not free. And the whole purpose of life, whether you have a religious background or whether you just have a background which is full of common sense, the reality is we know that if we don't discover love in our lives, we've completely missed the bus. I'm going to throw at you 2 measures of success. And now we're in new material. How do you measure if you're being successful as a parent? How will you measure? There's a guy called Jim Stenson who's come out to Australia a couple of times, and certainly he's had a big influence on me in the way I think about raising kids. And he insists that don't think if you're being successful when your kids are 16 or 18 and you're in your locked horns or whatever, but by the time they're 25, 26, 27, really they should be settled in the values that are taking them through life. And it's really important that you're aiming for that sort of moment where the kids are settled, they've decided on the priorities that they want in life, and hopefully they're settled also in their career and family directions. Okay, 2 measures of success. First one is that at that stage that your children have you've been able to pass on your own cherished values and ideals and faith, whatever it is that makes you tick, that you have been successful in passing on those values to your kids because you think they're important, you think they're the key to happiness. Well, you want to pass them on. And secondly, that your children are successful in forming and sticking with permanent loving relationships. And again, that's got a religious dimension too. If a person is religious, that they realize that we have to deal with God with love. But also, if a person is not deeply committed to love in their own family and in their own relationships with their spouse or their friends, then again, their life will be mostly impoverished. There's a fantastic study that's a 75-year longitudinal study that's come from Harvard. And basically it discovers that the people who are happiest in life are the people who have been most successful in loving relationships. So keep coming back to that. Keep coming back to that. Now, the 4 domains of character, again, you've seen that slide last month. And we talked about the first 2 there, management of fears and management of our habitual likes, if you like, as emotional habits or habits in our emotional capacities, so that for a good reason we can put up with things which are difficult, and we invest ourselves in things that we like to the extent that that's good for us. Too much of a good thing is not necessarily good for us. And then the last 2, empathy and respect, that we deal with others with respect and responsibility at all stages, and that we know how to think about things. They're more qualities of our intellectual life, that we have the right priorities in our life, and that we don't make ourselves the center of the world. Now, look at those 2 words at the bottom, train and educate. two key tasks I suggest, and this really comes from Aristotle. Aristotle's a genius when it comes to raising kids. He said, look, good parenting comes back to training the emotions in a child so that their conditioned response, if you like, their established disposition is always going to help them think clearly. So from the earliest years, we've got to keep coming back to this, right? From the earliest years, you want to keep coming back to the fact that your face is your first classroom and that your goal is to teach habits of self-control and resilience, first of all, by your own example. And always we've got to understand that this is tied in with the way we think. So it's important, even from the time children are younger, that they're used to hearing the reasons. We're not going to get in an argument with them. We're not going to quibble about reasons. We'll say that's the way it is, but that they know the reasons that they have to stop doing what they like and come to dinner. They know the reasons why they have to clean up after themselves because it's charitable for others. And usually the reasons will come back to consideration for others. So that's the training side of it. And the next side of it is education, that we work on the mind of this young person. And how do you work on the mind? Certainly by example, but also by the reasons that we give a young person, because afterwards they will have to give themselves reasons. In fact, again, Aristotle says that it's so important that children are obedient, because when children are obedient, they're obeying the reasons of their parents, because he says afterwards they will have to obey their own reason when they're older. So this is a long-term game, but it's really important that we don't just feel that we're educating kids for compliance. We're educating kids to develop their own convictions. So we have to keep giving them reason, keep consulting them, keep asking their opinion, let them make choices. There's a guy called David Isaacs who wrote a book, really seminal book about character education, which is called Building Character. And he insisted that it's really important that we let children make mistakes if they're not matters of moral or physical danger. Let them make their own mind up if it's not morally or physically dangerous, but then debrief afterwards, help them realize that they could have given themselves a different course of action that would have been bad for them. Remember that we're educating our capacity to know, and we're educating our capacity to make choices on the basis of knowledge. So habits of choosing come under the heading of justice, because we don't want to make ourselves the center of the universe. Respect and responsibility is priority in everything we do. And then prudence is the virtue really that breaks down to living in reality, not kidding ourselves about the truth, by the time a child is maybe 7 or 8, there's no way they should have a habit of telling lies. If they have a habit of telling lies, just with persistence, keep holding the reality in front of them so that they get out of the habit of telling lies. It's a life skill that they need. They talk about in California that 60% of the people of California, I think it is, lie in a conversation that they have, something ridiculous, right? But I mean, why is it that adults aren't telling the truth? And I'm sure we know better than California. We have to make sure that kids don't grow up with a habit of treating the truth lightly, because then they won't live in reality. They will kid themselves. And then they can be true to themselves about what's right and wrong, and they can set the right goals for themselves. Okay, just 2 or 3 slides about some background to this, and I'm sure Jith will sort of rub his doctor's hands together on this, but really our character is in our hands, because we know that when a person acts in a certain way, they actually change the pathways in their brain. And that's a silly slide, but what it does show is that when a person is given a learning task, or a rat probably in this case, when a rat is given a learning task, they actually can see the growth of the neurons in their brain, because they're developing pathways of behavior. Fascinating. We know what parts of the brain are involved in emotion and in regulating emotion. Because remember, we're embodied beings. We act through our brains. So We don't make decisions apart from our brains, but it's not our brains doing the thinking. We're free. We have a soul. And that purple area to the left there, which is in the forebrain, that's a massive avenue of neural conductivity. It's a great sort of nerve bundle, basically, between the emotional centers and the centers where we process emotion. So we know a lot about the way this works. Okay, let's talk about the 4 domains. Now, this is the meat of this session now. So over the next half hour or so, we're going to talk about the 4 domains of character. And the first one is temperance or self-control. And I'm suggesting that there'll be a few sort of key ideas you'll walk out from this. And I would suggest, like I did last time, that you may note the 2 or 3 ideas that you think are really useful and talk about them over a cup of coffee tonight with your spouse and think, okay, yeah, let's really focus in on that, because this particular child of ours is too impulsive, or this particular child of ours is too self-centered, or this particular child of ours has too much timidity. We need to help them grow a little bit in this quality. Sometimes we think of self-control as a negative quality. You know what? I put the marshmallows there. There's a fantastic video on the net. I might show it to you next time, but it's called, there was a guy called Miskell in the 1970s who set up an experiment which has been profoundly important in psychology. He shows that children who have a capacity to manage their emotional choices, their impulsive choices, when they're 5 and 6 and 7, if they had that capacity when they were small, this is a magnificent predictor of how they're going to be as adults in terms of having good control of themselves. So life is not about marshmallows. Life is about being able to say no to a marshmallow when we need to. But self-control is not primarily a negative virtue. Self-control is a positive virtue because it's about finding pleasure in what is good for us, only to the extent that it's good for us. In that experiment, he gave little children a marshmallow and he put it in front of them. And then he said, if that single marshmallow is there in 10 minutes' time, I'll give you another marshmallow. And it's quite humorous, but some of the kids just scoff the marshmallow, and others are so patient and they wait the 10 minutes and they get the extra reward. But just that capacity for restraint is a great predictor of future success. Interesting. Self-control is also about choosing what we pay attention to. Think about sitting in a pub. If you're sitting in a pub and there's a screen behind you and in front of you, and you're talking with someone, I don't know about you, but I find that my eyes are constantly flicking up to what's going on the screen. We find it very difficult as adults sometimes to choose what we pay attention to, but it's very, very important. And if we pay attention to things that are good for us, then it's going to help us a lot. So think about a young person who's addicted to pornography, that they're paying attention to the wrong stuff. They can't really not pay attention to it. It's become so compulsive for them, but it's wreaking havoc in their life. So think when you walk in the door in the afternoon at night, coming back from work, or when your spouse comes to the front door and comes in, do you pay attention to your loved one, or are you still doing what you're doing? Or are you still, a friend of mine said that when he walks in, he knows with little children that the first 3 minutes are crucial. If he does not give his little children his full attention in those first 3 minutes, then he's lost the opportunity. So, we pay attention to those things that we value in life, and people come above things every time. Knowing when to stop and under the table, knowing when to stop our work and come home for dinner, whatever it is, knowing when to stop is self-control. But children need that in its raw form when they're small so that afterwards they can grow. And finally, there's a long list I suppose you could come to, and I can give Jeff a very long questionnaire about raising children with self-control. But detachment from material things is another big area, isn't it? That we never think that our happiness is in things. And if you raise kids to think that their happiness is in things, or their happiness is in doing nothing, or their happiness is on Fridays and not on Mondays because you've got a week of work ahead of you, they're not the right messages for kids. If we really truly value others and we see work as service, it will be a beautiful thing to go to work on Monday morning. So we need to keep coming back to these basic ideas. Okay, look at this. This is the positive side, if you like, of teaching self-control, because we're teaching children to discover joy in what is good, true, and beautiful. This is a young couple that are very involved in the school here in Melbourne.
Okay. Come on. Oh, where's the camera? Okay, I think we're ready. Wow. I think for me, one of the most important things is cheerfulness. I find that if you're cheerful, if you're joyful with each other, it's much more difficult to get impatient with each other and with the children. Sometimes when I hear James, you probably don't even know this, coming around the corner, I start to smile, a really big smile, just so I change the mood of whatever he's thinking about, or I want him to be happy as well. She's all uncomfortable.
Sorry, very simple but very beautiful idea, isn't it? That we learn to discover joy in what's really beautiful in our lives, and we don't take it for granted. Look at this. We're tired of televisions, DVDs, and the internet. We want human sacrifice. In the end, we need to make sure that what we are delighting in are the most beautiful things that we have in our hands, that we delight in each other. We don't just take each other for granted. We delight in nature. We don't need to watch nature on a computer game and shoot people's heads off. It's a very strange phenomenon, isn't it? 45% or something of computer games are very violent. And we know that violence doesn't do a lot of good for kids. We know there are 3 effects from violent computer games on kids. The first one is desensitization to violence, and the next one is that over the next 20 minutes or so, kids are more aggressive. But the third effect is quite interesting, that, and it shows how wrong it is to go to the sort of gladiatorial games or whatever on the internet, right? Because when we walk down the street, if we've been playing violent computer games, we start to see threats where there are no threats. We start to be more fearful in life, and life's not meant to be like that. Sure, it has its moments, but it's not meant to be like that. Helping kids say no, that the kids have a habit of saying no to themselves starts with you saying no. So Jim Stenson says, do not permit what you disapprove of. Help kids realize that, no, we'll have morning tea, we'll have afternoon tea, but we don't just keep raiding the fridge. And of course, we need to start with that. And it goes to mobile phones as well. No, mobile phones are important. We use them. They help us to stay connected, but we don't answer mobile phones at the table. We say no to ourselves so that the kids can see that no is a really important word. Dads, did you have the experience of holding the torch for your father when he was doing jobs? And I always thought of it as a bit of a chore, I suppose, as a kid, because you never could quite hold the beam where you were meant to hold it. But I wanted to get a photo of kids holding a torch for their father for this slide. And apparently there's a lot of memes on the internet about dads shouting at their sons when the torch doesn't get held right. And I'm thinking, wow, what a pity, how counterproductive that is, because it's an ideal opportunity to teach children to focus their attention and to stay focused. Think about sport. Think about that third bullet point there. You're kicking the ball to a boy and you say, watch the ball. I mean, it's a simple thing, but teaching kids to really be completely immersed in the moment is a skill. And we need to do it ourselves. Obviously, we want to be immersed in our members of our family when we're sitting with them in a lounge room. We want to be immersed in a conversation and not have our eyes on the screen at the same time. Stuff like that. this is the really nasty side of intemperance, if you like, because the opposite of temperance or self-control is intemperance. But Miranda Devine is a major columnist here in Australia. I don't know if she's syndicated in New Zealand, but she writes with a lot of common sense. But she said recently, look, children have become canaries in the coal mine of a sex-soaked culture. And what are canaries in a coal mine? You put canaries down a coal mine so that they fall off their perch before you do. As soon as the canary falls off the perch, as soon as the canary is sacrificed in that way, you know the air is no longer breathable and you get out of there. What's going on? We're setting kids up to fail because we've got such a sexualized environment. And of course, what that means is we're only worried about bodies. We're not worried about who is the person. And that's why that's why the couple there are not even able to look at each other, because all that's involved in the relationship is the physical. How do you get kids out of this? You help them realize that, yes, we've been given all these beautiful pleasures in life, but we have to use them in a way that's reasonable. And once we use them in a selfish way, it's no longer reasonable. Big point. The guidance you give to your kids about human love and sexuality is crucial, because we know the stats. We know how many kids they did a big survey in England in 2012. 4 out of 5 16-year-olds are regularly accessing pornography, and our countries will be the same. So what can we do so that kids don't fall into that trap? Look at this beautiful little video. This is about the positive way of building a love for what is good, true, and beautiful.
A lot of parents would like the kids to, learn an instrument and be good at an instrument. But I learned trumpet for 7 years. I had 7 years of trumpet lessons. And I can't play a note of trumpet because I hated it. I was just not a trumpet player. I just didn't have any love for it. But, I picked up a guitar and when I was 16 and sat on the end of a bed and a bit of piano and so I liked them, and I played them. I still play them today, So that our plan is to hopefully plan to love of it, So I think you've got to love, to really be good at something, you have to love it. In my whole life, I've never met anyone who's truly exceptional at something that they didn't love. But my gut feel, I think, is that's the best shot, is to plant a love for stuff. So we have music every day and we enjoy it. A lot of parents are loving.
Did you hear what he was saying? Sienna rhymes with banana. What's going on? It's whatever kids love. Kids will love what we love. So if we want children to have a love for nature, we have to love nature. If we want children to love reading, we have to love reading. If we want children to love our faith, we have to love our faith. We have to show that. And remember we talked about fix your face, and in the end, how do children know we love something? Because of the joy it gives us. Okay, what about fortitude, resilience, courage? Fortitude is about being able to manage our difficulties, give ourselves reasons to put up with things, reasons to put up with discomfort, reasons to keep sitting at a table and keep doing our work. That's why routines and timetables, jobs in the home, those things are so important, because kids get used to doing things that they don't like, cleaning up after themselves. So how do you clean up? When you have a drink, do you wash the cup and put it away? Or do you just dump it and leave it for someone else? Interesting problem, right? I mean, in the end, if we can't put up with things that cause a little bit of discomfort, then it's hard for the kids to learn to do that. And go further than that, we've got a crisis we know in our societies of resilience, of mental health ultimately. Kids not knowing how to put up with difficulties and failure. And that means you and I have to model optimism constantly. And we have to know where to go to get help. And we have to show the kids how to break a problem up into small bits so that they can tackle it. A healthy hardiness is not just a an intellectual hardiness. It's that we get out and we're prepared to walk to the shops instead of drive, things like that. We do our duty before play because that helps other people. You know, one of the best reasons we can give ourselves for fortitude is that it helps others. So we can come back to that. Look at this. This is Dan. This is Dan and Liz Carrick, who, with another couple of couples, were fundamental in starting the school here in Melbourne. You'll see their little twins in a minute on the screen.
We've thought a little bit about how we instill good habits in the kids. And one thing that we are trying to work on is just short and sharp little grabs, little sentences, little slogans that we can pull out. And one that gets recycled a lot is, you got to try again, you got to try again. You got to try again and you got to try again.
Well, actually, it's good to try again.
It's good to try again.
You got to try again.
Yeah. So we find it works really well. They're little things that they can remember. And then when they've tried again and find that they're successful, it's there's a lot of enthusiasm and encouragement and excitement, lots of clapping. So for example, I can't find my shoe. And like, okay, well, where are your shoes? Oh, well, they're in my cupboard. I found one in my cupboard, but the other one's not there. I'm sure I looked everywhere and it's not there. So, well, why don't you try again? And then they come back, I found my shoe. And you're like, oh, well done. You tried again. It's good to try again.
Being the luckiest dad in the world, it's not, I'm thinking taxing, but no, you get lots of snuggles. And I would much prefer to have lots of snuggles and clean up and be woken up every night than to not have lots of snuggles.
It makes you think, doesn't it? So make sure you take your rose-colored glasses off with kids. That if you are trying to train young people and you think they can do no wrong, and you idolize your kids, you put them on a mantelpiece, you put them up as a trophy child, of course you won't be able to guide them. You will have the wrong glasses on. And I remember vividly talking to a dad saying, look, because we've been away in a camp together, and I said, I think your son's a little bit fussy. And he said, my son's not fussy. And unfortunately his son was very fussy, and it's played out in his adult life. So we need to try to make sure that we don't idolize our kids in the wrong sense, that we don't live our life again through our kids. Plato talks about that. He said parents stand on the sidelines of sport because they want to live their own childhoods again. There's something wrong with that. It's a selfish way of parenting. We can't do that. My granny always used to say tripe. She would always say, that's tripe. So don't accept tripe. Don't accept something that isn't good enough, and do it in a kind way, but say, no, you can do better than that. Have another go at it. And we've talked about obedience, but clear expectations are crucial if we want to raise children so that they have fortitude. Think about how physically demanding you are on yourself and how you raise your children to be physically demanding on themselves, whether it's getting together with other families on a father-son camp, that's what that photo is, or just going out with the family on bushwalks or whatever. There's a story about John Paul, who woke up in the middle, his mum had died, and he woke up in the middle of the night at 2 a.m. and he looked through the door of the other room of their two-room apartment, and he saw his father on his knees praying at 2 a.m. And he reminisced in his memoirs. He said, my father never had to be tough on me because he was so tough on himself. One of the greatest figures in the 20th century wasn't raised in a harsh environment. He wasn't raised with a demanding dad. He was raised with a loving dad. And whenever we get impatient with children, we've got to keep reminding ourselves it's my problem. It's not the child's problem. One of the best stories I have about one of the families that I've most admired in the years that I've taught. I asked the father once why he was so successful with his 3 boys. And he said that when the one who was in year 11 had been in year 7, so when he was about 12, about 5 years before, he said, he did something wrong and I corrected him for it. I spoke to him firmly about it and he wouldn't have raised his voice. He's a large man who doesn't need to shout. And my son had tears in his eyes and I was so proud of him. And then a week later, the same behaviour came back. And I'm thinking, this is not my son's problem. This is my problem. I need to give my boy more support. So from that point on, every week he would help each of his boys have a goal for the week, and it was their goal. So gradually they learned to keep setting themselves goals and keep knocking over those goals. Fantastic result. We had a session with parents once at one of the schools I was at, and we asked them what expectations they had of children. And it was wildly different. Some parents had all sorts of expectations for a child in year 2, which is about 7 years of age, that they would bake cakes and they would do the washing and they would hang out the washing and they would do the vacuuming. And then one mum said, if he's old enough to walk, he's old enough to vacuum. Wow, not bad. Now, you don't have to get your kids doing the vacuum, but what's the point? That work is a school of fortitude. You know, we end up doing it because it's a way of serving others. Keep coming back to it. I asked the gentleman who'd been the managing director of the schools in Sydney. I was going off to give a parenting talk, and I said, quick, give me a grab. And he stopped and he thought, and he said, tell the parents that you're talking to, the more you love your kids, the less you do for them. The more you love them, the less you do for them. The more you teach them to look after themselves. That's your job as a parent. What about complaints? A parent that I've had a lot to do with, he said he has a complaints book. And when one of his children complains, he brings out the complaints book. And the complaints book, on every double page spread, it has photo combinations like this. So on the left, it's got little chubby checker there. And on the right-hand side, it's got the poor kids from Africa. And as soon as the child sees this and is reminded, he just realizes, gee, how fortunate I am. No more complaints. Maybe you need a complaints book at times, but first of all, we must not complain ourselves. Think about raising kids with fortitude so that they actually take on tasks that they wouldn't dream of doing. You don't have to take your kids abseiling, but I remember vividly taking some boys abseiling, and one of the kids was standing on the side of the cliff, and you have to lean over if you're abseiling, and his knees were shaking. And then one of the other kids cruelly said, look at his knees, how they're shaking. And he said, it's only my knees shaking. And then he went down the cliff. It was very impressive how mind over matter. What about Rafa? I heard you're a tennis player. Rafa says, and you know, he plays a very physical game. You can hear him grunting, you know, but also physically demanding on his knees and his elbows particularly. And that's taken its toll. He's had, you know, difficult times with injuries, but he said, I have learned to love suffering. So in a sense, we have to say the same thing when we talk about growing in fortitude, that we've learned to love suffering. Okay, let's talk about justice. Justice it's got a number of dimensions, but probably the most important thing is that we keep coming back to the idea that it's in every decision that I make that I take others into account. I never, ever act selfishly or self-indulgently, which obviously is a massive goal. We try not to. But your job when your kids are young is to teach them not to act selfishly or self-indulgently. That means we always have to think, how is this going to affect people? And it means when you sit around the dinner table, you never talk about people badly. You don't put up with conversations in the back of the car where children are criticizing a teacher or another child in the class. Kindness to all, without exception. That if there's somebody asking for money on the side of the street, at least we have the courtesy of looking at them. We don't just ignore them. And we can have, you know, we know everyone's got a background and everyone's got their story, but we need to have a kind heart. If we don't have a kind heart, we will not raise children with kind hearts. Think about compassion. Give each other feedback. Think about generosity in a home. That we help each other because we are a family. That we pay attention to each other. We never, ever in our home do we talk to each other and we don't give each other the time of day by looking at each other and giving our full attention. Little things like that. If you're teaching a class, even a class of university students, and you see, oh gee, we're not very grateful people, are we? Of course, then you give out a handout. Everybody says thank you. But if you did not say that before you gave out the handout, you might get 10% saying thank you. We think we're grateful and we're not. We have to keep working at this. Think about your own home. If we lash out, what does it mean? It says a lot about how my emotions are more important than your feelings. We must not lash out. There's too much damage. I know one couple that eventually broke up because of post-traumatic stress, not from because the guy laid his hand on his wife, but because he didn't manage his words. That's tragic. And we can't go that far, obviously. Look at this. So obviously part of it, and Andrew and Katie are Kiwis who've gone back across to your side of the water now. Here we go. Listen to the way they teach kindness to their kids.
Well, we're at quite a fun stage because Zaylee, our second, is about 7 months old now. So we're really at a point where I guess the interaction between Henri and Zaylee is starting to flow in both directions quite noticeably. So we've had some really nice moments, but we've also had some moments where Henri's needed a little bit of encouragement just to look after his baby sister, just to be gentle with her. This was when Zaylee was about 4 months old, so still pretty featherweight, I guess, not that she's that much heavier.
This was in Andrew's parents' house, and I popped her down, came out, and she had gone, and I was like, oh my goodness, like she's rolled off somewhere or something or other, because it was at the top of the stairs. Anyway, I went round the corner, and Henri had her by one leg and was like dragging her along the floor.
Dragging her away from the stairs. Not bad. Very nice. This is universal, isn't it? Our prime purpose in life is to help others. Life is not worth living unless it's lived for others. Is this the case in your family? Does this hold true in your family? Remember, we're talking here about education. We're talking about forming the mind of a young person. So other people always have priority. These were some words, and I realize not all of us will be Catholic, but I think there's a universal wisdom here. Pope Francis is talking in one of his recent documents about how we live in a very individualist culture. And that he talked about marriage as the experience of really belonging completely to another person. So these are good measures for our own relationships and our own attitudes. I'm not going to waste time on these next few slides, although I wanted to make the point that when we're raising young people with a keen concern for others, that often it plays in fortitude as well. This young man, married with several children, and he was obviously committed to the welfare of his country in the Iraqi forces after the war. He was in the Free Iraqi Army after the Second Iraqi War. There was a suicide bomber in the market, and he threw himself on the suicide bomber and gave his own life in the process, but obviously saving many lives. Makes you think, right? That the virtue in the end is about really going out of our way to help others, to stand up for truth. Look at this guy, Gustav Vigat. Everybody else is saluting Hitler in 1937. He's not. He managed to survive the war somehow, but he's not interested, and they tracked him down afterwards. He ended up as the mayor of his town. Remember the tank man? These tanks were rolling into Beijing one day after Tiananmen Square, and they were going to contribute to the loss of life in Tiananmen Square and in student protests and so on. He was doing his shopping. He walks back in front of the tanks, and the video is on YouTube, and it's very moving because you realize that he doesn't just stand there. He's not caught on the crossing. He goes out deliberately. The tank tries to get past him. He blocks the tank. The tank tries again. He blocks the tank. He gets up on the tank. He explains to the guys inside. But then the sad thing is that somebody comes across, hustles him away, and he was never seen again. I mean, these are difficult things, right? But obviously, he was a courageous man who realized, I have to do something to stop what's going to happen. in our own world, in our own lives, kids need reasons. If you go to Huckaway Hills, which is the school here in Melbourne, above the sink is a little sign from Mother Teresa, and it says, "We wash the cup not because it's a job we have to do, but because of the next person who is going to use it." So always the best reason to do difficult things is because it's going to help others. Always. We have to use that in our own families. And now the fourth of the categories is sound judgment. And that means teaching kids to reflect, to set their own priorities and goals, that they listen to others, that they know how to work with order, that they have a timetable, even if it's very basic, just 2 or 3 times a day when they do things. That they want to know what's right and wrong, that they're always sincere. These things are so important. You know, think about how we manage our own emotional reactions to things, that we know how to stop and count to 10 or remove ourselves from a situation where we're getting cranky. These things are all about sound judgment. Do you recognize that couple? Listen to this.
Order is very important for kids, and I think they're happier when they have a bit of order and routine in their day.
And one of the ways we try to help them with that is by having a visual aid. So we have a chart that I drew up for their morning and evening routines, and we got them involved in it and got them to colour it in and contribute to what are the different steps we need to take before we go to school. So it would be things like getting dressed, having breakfast. So mom and dad don't need to always tell them this is what you need to do next. They can use their eyes, go and look at the chart, what's next.
Exactly. And it works really well, and they have some ownership of it as well, because they actually coloured it in and meshed through it, so they can actually see exactly what they need to do and what's next.
The virtue of prudence, the virtue of sound judgment is about choosing well, isn't it? It's about being able to have the information we need to make good choices. So part of your job as a parent is to make sure that your kids have a really deep understanding of the reasons to do things. You're giving them the guide map, the roadmap, if you like, to life. So why should we do what we do? Why do we do this? Because it helps others. Keep coming back to that as a reason. Viktor Frankl, you may be familiar with. He wrote a wonderful book called Man's Search for Meaning. He was already a famous psychiatrist before he was put in Dachau or Auschwitz, but he used his time in a concentration camp as a Jew there by the Nazis to refine his views. And he realized that people who have meaning in their lives, who can give themselves reasons to live, are much more likely to live. So we need to give ourselves reasons for the big goals in our life. We can't just give in to our impulses. That sort of idea. These are things to talk about with older kids. There are some great videos on YouTube of him talking about this very issue. Commitments. When you make a promise, when you make a resolution, it's helping you live the virtue of prudence, because you're committing yourself, particularly if you voice that to people around you. When you marry, you say you give your promises in front of other people. Promises in front of other people are powerful. We stick to them. They're a vow. Do you teach your kids to commit themselves to resolutions so that afterwards they can stick to a good course of action? Setting goals. I'm sorry that that's fallen out on the left, but it's just simply set goals, that we know how to set goals for ourselves, that we don't go through life just aimlessly. A lot of kids in their 20s don't have goals. They just let life take over. Sophie Scholl's a real hero. If you've ever come across the White Rose movement in Germany, they were teenagers and young adults who mobilized against the Nazis, and they decided that they were going to make pamphlets, and they had a whole network to distribute these pamphlets against the Nazis, and they got 6 pamphlets out, and they distributed them across the cities of Germany. Finally, they were tracked down, and finally they were actually executed by the Nazis. But look what he writes. How can we expect a righteousness to prevail when there is hardly anyone who will give himself up to undivided to a righteous cause. And, you know, in our own countries, we've got big things, you know. I mean, part of the way we teach prudence to kids is that we go and we knock on the door of a parliamentarian and say, listen, can you do something about this? I'm raising a family and this is not a family-friendly policy. But we speak up because we want to teach the kids in their turn to speak up, that fortitude and prudence and self-control and justice all go hand in hand. Okay, I've had my say. I've gone for about 35 minutes or 40 minutes on that now, but think about what your take-homes are. I'm going to stop screen sharing and we might have some sort of conversation if we can across the Tasman. Here we go. Jith, how would you like to do this?
I've got a few questions here. You could have given me a heads up, Andy, about
I didn't want you to say, oh no, don't show that. It's charming.
So the first question is, of the cardinal virtues, which one as parents should we be most concerned with for our children?
That's a good question. Certainly it's never too early to start with temperance and fortitude, that you're raising kids to manage their emotional life when they're very young. So your example, even when they're tiny, is crucial. Even when they're very early, when they're in the cot, your emotional example is crucial. And then as soon as you can start to give reasons to a child and you think there's any sort of comprehension, then start to give reasons. But the way that it's evident that we live for each other, that we get up and we help others. They've done experiments now with 2 and 3 year old children. This is crazy, with 2 and 3 year old children. And they know that a 2 or a 3 year old child knows when a parent needs a hand and when they've just done something. So the experiment was dropping something. If a parent drops something deliberately, the child wouldn't pick it up. But if a child is carrying, if the parent, is carrying things and then something falls on the ground, the child will reach to pick it up and give it to the parent. What's going on? That even a child that young can already understand that helping others is crucial. And so it's never too early to start with emotional example, but then it's important that we don't wait until kids are 6 or 7 or 8 to give them reasons. And it's really important that we keep giving children the space to make choices as soon as they're old enough to do that. Sorry, I've dodged the question slightly because in the end, it's our emotional example, and the example we give is going in. So we need to make sure that right from the start, we're giving that example.
Okay, thanks, Andy. Another question is, when it's difficult to teach a child good habits because they seem to not care about consequences, I've been told that instead of negative consequences, to focus on positive parenting instead. The problem with this is I find that my child, who is particularly prone to this, becomes too much of a junkie for praise. How do you discipline a child who does not seem to care about consequences?
Yeah, it's always good. I have one of the parents of the school that I was at was in charge of the Australian soldiers in East Timor. And he said to me once, he's got a family of boys, they're great kids. And he said, praise in public, correct in private. Children are Teflon coated when we correct them in public. I thought, I like that. What's the point? The point is we want to praise behaviours. We don't want to praise children mindlessly. We just praise the behaviour, and that's a way of reinforcing good behaviour, that's for sure. And it always works, and it works in every good classroom. But also we need to correct kids, but we need to correct kids calmly. And I think that's the big mistake that we very often make. We allow our impatience to get the best of us, and we start correcting kids impatiently. Kids become inured to that, and then we just have to keep raising our voice louder and louder. I know as a teacher, it doesn't work. You can have absolute stand-ups with kids and it doesn't work. So what you have to do is to make sure that we target the behavior and we correct things calmly. There's a funny story about one young man at Redfield who the teacher corrected him fairly crankily one day, and then he sought the boy out the next day and he said, "Look, I'm sorry, I got so angry with you." And the boy just said to his dad, sorry, the boy just said to the teacher, "Oh, it's okay, sir, you have to correct me." But I mean, Indian kids expect it, right? So we don't do kids a favor if we raise them so that they think they're the center of the universe. That's against justice.
Thanks, Andy. Another question here is, how early should we train our kids? Can it be too late to develop our child's character?
Oh, it's never too late. Oh, no, it's never too late. It's an interesting problem, that, isn't it? This is a tough story, but I'm going to say it anyway. One young man that I had a lot to do with his family, and they were very wealthy, and then they lost everything, literally everything. And the father tried to take his life. The mother became a Catholic. The oldest child coped okay. The youngest child span out. The youngest child was about maybe 12 or 13 at the time. And he left school. He went to another school, then he left school, and then things just went from bad to worse. He got mixed up with substances. He got mixed up with the wrong people. And to boot, he ended up getting mental illness, probably substance induced. And very sadly, he then contracted cancer and passed away from cancer. And it just seemed like it had all completely gone in the wrong direction. And I knew, however, that his mum had never given up on him, right? I know that. And she rang me 2 months after he died. And she said, "I just wanted to tell you that they've brought across the boxes that he had in his flat where he was when he died. And they contain beautiful things. They contain books about our faith that he had been writing in the margins, and everybody thought this guy had completely walked away from religion, right? And it contained a diary. And in the diary, 2 weeks before he had died, he wrote, "I just want to be holy. I want to die with a smile on my face." And then she said, "And now I know why, when I walked into the room after he had died and he was on the bed, why he had a smile on his face." I mean, what do you make of that? Except that it's never too late, and that also that never give up on your kids. Never give up on your kids. And your job, once your kids are older, you've got kids in your hands at the moment. Once your kids are older, it's your job as parents of adult kids to keep supporting them with your advice and with your prayers and everything. But keep coming back to this. It's not just I realize that this is not a religious talk, but gee, it's so important that we understand that the support you give to people has all sorts of dimensions, and that it's never over.
Thanks. Andy, there's another question here. Our 6-year-old son is allowed to play video games for 30 minutes every day after completing all his duties. But still, we feel he is developing an addiction. He puts playing video games as the biggest priority of the day. How can we make him understand that video games is not the top priority?
Big one, isn't it? Don't let him play. If it's becoming an addiction, you have to address it. And video game addiction is a real issue. It's in the DSM manuals now. It's crazy, right? So what do we do? I know dads who've been addicted playing video games to 1 a.m. regularly in the mornings, right? What do we do? You just got to go cold turkey for a while. With a child, it's not necessary to go cold turkey possibly, but you've got to help him realize that no, when mum calls you, you've got to finish. That this is one, and talk to him. This is one of the things you're going to have to learn to manage in life, mate, that you say no to yourself when there's something else to be done. I don't mean that he should not watch any video games, but I think the crucial thing is that this has to become a teaching opportunity. And And there can be consequences if he, you know, once he steps over the line and he complains, or he doesn't do what he's meant to do because he was playing games, then he loses that privilege and he understands, no, mum and dad have to say no, mate.
Another question here about, is it good to bribe our children to achieve good behavior?
Depends what you bribe them with. If you bribe them with love and hugs, it's maybe not such an issue. If you bribe them with material things, maybe it is an issue. So have to think about that. Does it mean you should never give kids a reward? Of course not. But we don't want them, you know, we've probably all been in a situation where, you know, our happiness was set on getting a particular gift for Christmas, and that's ridiculous in the end. We don't want to raise kids for that, with that sort of expectation, you know. So how do you make sure that interpersonal rewards are more important than material rewards? By making sure that there's lots of interpersonal rewards in your family. I don't know if I talked about this one last time, but it struck me, you know, that one family here in Melbourne was telling me that they went away on a holiday to resort, you know, and it was a very expensive holiday. And then they asked the child at the end of it all, what did you enjoy most? And it wasn't the expensive resort. It was that they stood on the edge of the pool, they all held hands and they jumped in the pool together. That was what the child remembered best about that holiday. So interpersonal rewards, how do you make sure that that's happening in your family?
Okay, I've got one last question, which is, I think a really a question that I've always asked myself as well, is as parents, we strive to overcome our own failings, and we always know we could do more to model good habits. It is easy to despair when we see the same shortcomings in our children. Other than keep trying, are there any other words of hope you can offer?
Hey, I don't see any despair. All I see is people smiling. That's crazy. Look, nobody's despairing. What's going on? But remember, fix your face. If you fix your face, a lot of other things will follow. The things that are really important have to give us joy. That's the only thing that matters. Remember, live in the moment. Don't live in the hypothetical future where things can come off the rails. Live in the moment. That's it.
Okay, I think we'll draw things to a close. Thanks so much, Andy. I mean, I've heard you speak so many times, but every single time I always come away feeling like I've learned a lot more, and I really am very grateful for that. So thank you very much for sharing your words of wisdom and your insight and experience with us all. We're all the more richer for it.
Absolute pleasure. And I see the Fransons there. I think I've communicated with the Fransons, but I haven't actually met you. I would love to do that.
Okay, so hopefully we'll see all of you on the 27th of September. Same time, same place.
I see Paolo and Malu waving to me. Good on you guys. Good to see you. And I'm sorry that there's many others there that I don't know, but I hope there comes an opportunity I can get across and see you guys at some stage.
Well,
thanks very much, mate. See you in a month.
See you. Bye. Bye.
Peru.
Bye, everyone.